Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about a titan of the science fiction genre, and that would be Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. This is a book from about 70 years ago. It was written in 1953, and this uses one of my favorite tropes of all time, the first contact trope. And if you haven't read this story before, I highly recommend that you do. This book has influenced so many other works in the science fiction genre. It's actually incredible as I was reading it, the amount of things that were coming to me like, oh, this story borrowed everything from, well, not everything, but it borrowed so much from this story. It was just an incredible journey. So let me tell you what it was about. The story follows the peaceful alien invasion of Earth by mysterious overlords whose arrival begins decades of apparent utopia under indirect alien rule at the cost of human identity and culture. So like I said, First Contact is always a hit for me, and this one in particular I think does it really well. This is a book that just really is an idea book, and I think a lot of classic sci-fi really does do that big idea concept better than a lot of other ones, at the cost of character lacking in a lot of different ways. And with that being said, let me talk about some of the things that worked for me with this book and some of the things that didn't work for me as much. So the best thing about this book for me is First Contact. I think when you go into a First Contact story, the ability of a creative author to just kind of go into places that, you know, a normal story never will. It has the ability to just kind of introduce an entire different culture and also kind of let you play with technology that is on a different level than what is currently available to humans. Obviously, this book being written in the 1950s, there were some things that humanity is lacking in this that dates the book a little bit. Mostly space travel is kind of one of those things that really the space race was kind of kicking up and everything, and so some of that technology is lacking, though there are mentions of space travel from humans throughout this book. But the First Contact part of this is awesome, and the way it's done, a lot of times with First Contact, a lot of times the alien is coming to just kind of conquer and take over. And in this case, they actually come and bring a utopia. They elevate humanity to a level that, you know, Arthur C. Clarke didn't think humanity could get to. And that is one thing about this book, is you can really see, and this was a thing in more older sci-fi, that a lot of authors didn't have a lot of faith in humanity. And part of that is nuclear scare. During this time when this was written, that was one of the hot topics of the world was nuclear scare. We were all going to wipe ourselves out within the next 10 years from a nuclear war. And that is definitely something that is very present in this book. And the overlords that come, you know, one of the things they do is kind of set humanity straight and put humanity on rails and kind of set them on the path to being able to just be indulgent. You know, working isn't really a thing that anyone has to do, you know, things like that. And that utopia is so different than a lot of things we get where, you know, aliens are coming to destroy us. They need our resources. They're coming to take over, and they are so technologically advanced that there's nothing we can do about it. This was much more, District 9 really seemed to kind of borrow some things, well, not some, but the idea that, you know, the ship is here and they are not here to take over. That's a kind of one of the parallels that I got was District 9, if you've seen that movie. That seemed like a borrowed idea, even though they go down completely different paths. But once again, First Contact is always awesome. I don't want to try and spoil a 70-year-old book, but the cost of what becomes of this utopia and the reason the overlords are there is absolutely thought-provoking, and it's something that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. The fact that there was a cost to this utopia, and the whole time you're reading this book, you know, you don't know if you really trust the overlords, and that's another positive I have. And maybe part of that is just the cynical nature of maybe myself, or kind of the stories that I have read more of where we can't trust this peaceful guardian that is watching over us. And the fact that there ends up being a cost, it was done really well, because it kind of got to the point where you weren't not expecting something to happen, but what happens was nowhere on my bingo card of things that were going to happen. And so just another thing that even though this book is 70 years old, it was still fresh. I mean, it's, you know, it's still really fresh and has ideas that are worth reading today. I don't think that just because it's old, you shouldn't read it. I mentioned earlier that this is an idea book, and yeah, it definitely is. Some of the concepts that it introduces and tries to execute on are done very, very well. The thought that these overlords not only want to help humanity, but also preserve what humanity was when they got there was something really cool. Kind of like how in today's society, if archaeologists or somebody, or would they be anthropologists, I guess technically, when they go and try to study a tribe that it has very little external contact with the outside world, they want to know why they do things and try to preserve some of that culture. And seeing that done from an alien race to humans and how different that species is to Homo sapiens was just done super, super well. And this is this book is just so full of ideas that I know that I'm going to be just thinking about them a lot, and I'm just gonna randomly be sitting somewhere and I'm gonna see something that reminds me of this book and just think of the ideas. And even while I was reading this book, I was trying to think of what was the ulterior motive of the overlords, why were they doing these things, and the whole way that spans out, where the overlords maybe are not as all-knowing and all-powerful as you think as you go through this book. It's just executed so well. And the last positive I will mention is, I kind of already mentioned it, but it is all of the influences you see. This book is obviously super influential for a lot of science fiction writers, and I think that's a great thing. I think being able to borrow from history and influential books and then evolve on that idea is great. I mean, I think Lord of the Rings is probably the best example, where it really laid the foundation out for an entire genre. And think about some of the stuff we have gotten since Lord of the Rings that is just exponentially better and on a different level. And that's a hot take, my Lord of the Rings hot take, that I don't think it's as good as a lot of modern stuff. But same thing here, except this still lives up to a modern standard. There are some things that I didn't like, which I guess I can get to now, and this is a symptom of older science fiction and the way that this book is written. This book takes the span of decades to culminate into the ending, and because of that, a lot of the characters are only there for a short period of time. And once again, older sci-fi in general seems to have a problem with characterization, building characters up, having strong characters. It normally does lay, at least the ones I have read, lays very heavily on the ideas that are being presented, and characters are really just a vessel to present ideas to you. And so once again, this is a book that the characters, outside of one or two characters, aren't all that compelling. I mean, in general, yes, they're not horrible characters, but I think that, a modern audience would expect a little bit more out of characters than they do in, from a book this old. And my only other really kind of negative to say about this book, because I don't have that many, is that some of the things mentioned in here are out of date. And I kind of already touched on that. The nuclear scare is kind of a really big thing that is presented in this novel, and that there was a real pessimistic view from a lot of authors of this time that humanity just was going to absolutely end itself. And I mean, that is still a prevailing feeling to some, even in today's world, but it just felt really heavy-handed that there was no way humanity was going to have the power of nuclear weapons and make it. And obviously, 70 years ago, this was a much, much greater prevailing feeling than it is now, even though I think, that's a whole different argument we could make about how people feel about it now. But it really seemed that was kind of like author, placing their hand in the story saying, hey, this is a really bad thing. We need to do and change things or we'll never make it. And I think there are probably different issues that authors would look at today that say, hey, this is actually a bigger issue than nuclear scares. Which, like I said, I'm kind of nitpicking here because I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. So overall, I think it was a really great read. I do think that pretty much everyone should read it. I think that even if you are a very character-focused reader, if you enjoy sci-fi and you have not read this book like me, you absolutely need to. It's not a very long book, and I would also say to make sure you read the original book. I think Clarke went back and had edited this book a few different times. I don't know what was changed, honestly, but I think reading the original work is probably the best, just because if he went back in and changed things, I think reading the original story as it was intended, even if the author themselves go back and change it, I don't know, I just kind of like reading the original work. I did it with Frankenstein, there's different versions of that, but I think reading the original text as it was intended to be without changes or second guesses of the author, even if it's of themselves, is always the best thing to do. But have you read this book? If you have, let me know what you think about it down in the comments, and I hope you have a good one.